Welcome back. In the first part of this live coding session, we recreated the Arduino keypad element in Inkscape. Then we exported it and turned it into a custom HTML element. Now we are going to take ownership of this code. We will clean it up, remove duplicate code, and then we'll make sure it's easy to read, understand, and maintain. Let's start. First of all, if you remember, we had like a bunch of rectangles, and we can see them here. And then there is a bunch of text elements. And finally, there is another rectangle here. And if you look, there is a lot of like repetition here. For instance, we have all those rectangles, which are, I think, actually the keys. The easy way to figure this out would be just to comment out one of them and see what happens in, let's do this, in Storybook. Is it still running? Yep, just Webpack is slow while I'm recording. Okay, so this like was the first key. And if we check out all those rectangles, we can see that there is a lot of repetition, like the fill of this rectangle repeats multiple times. If I press Ctrl D, we can actually see that it repeats like 10 times. And it makes sense because this rectangle has the same properties as all of these other rectangles. And instead of like copy pasting the same thing over or over again, there are a couple of tricks we can do. And one of those tricks would be to create a template element. So we can create an SVG defs, which actually just defs, which allows us to define a shape that can be used later. And we can take this template rectangle. This one was, I think we said this was number 1, and move it to defs. Once we do that, you will see that just like with a comment, it's going to disappear from the screen. And then the next thing we want to do, we just want to use it. So basically, with the defs, we are going to remove the X and Y because each button is going to have different X and Y values. And we are going to give it an ID. Let's call it key. And then the next thing would be just to call the SVG use and say, I think it's xlink href, and to point at it at the key. We don't need the SVG prefix, it's already implied. And now when I save this, you should probably see the key appearing, but it's not appearing at the right place. And in order to fix that, I'm going to put this use element inside a group element. And I will say gtransform equals translate. And then I can give it the original X and Y. Right, so this is how we reduce code repetition. We basically create the element once and then call use to draw the key. And it should probably refresh in a moment, and you will see we now have this same key, but now it's using this reusable element that we defined. And then the next thing we are going to do is just to I think I will just mute Telegram so it stops interrupting us. So the next thing we are going to do is just to do the same with all the other buttons. So we are going to use the nice multi-cursor option of Visual Studio Code to do this. Basically, we need to find all the rectangles that have the same stroke or the same fill color. Which are like this one, 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 this one. No, this one was the template. And then since they all have like the same format, we can use the multi-cursor to turn them into an SVG use element. So basically just remove all these lines and that's much shorter. and also the rect, and then we have just a bunch of X and Y's that we can turn into SVG, do a group with. Let's see, should say transform equals to translate, and then we have this X. We can remove all this Y and close the group element. Now all we need to do is just paste here this use X link. I will just copy it because it's short. href equals hash key, self-closing element, and I think we got this body. I'm not sure what's up with this guy, so let's just comment it out for a moment. Oh, I guess this was like the first one, so let's just use the XY here as another group. So basically 22 and 10. All right, so at this point, I think we should see that we still have the buttons, but now we are using this key element instead. Yep. And we have another kind of button, which is the red button. So let's first of all move it down. So we have all the red buttons together. And then we can say these are like the blue buttons. And what is this one? Okay. And this is like, these are like the red buttons. Okay, and we can do the same with the red buttons. I mean, the only difference between the blue and the red buttons is the fill color. So there are actually a few ways to go about that. If we want to reuse the same key element, I think what we can do is just, yeah, let's do it this way. We can remove the fill from the SVG def, and I think, let me see if that works. If I give that group a specific fill, it will just inherit this fill. Let's see if this does the trick. I hope it does. And if it does, we can use the same button, the same key element for, yep, all the red keys. So basically we want to apply this fill to all these blue buttons. So we can write gfill equals this. And then we just put them together in one group, and they all have the same fill color. And then for the red buttons, we do something similar. We create another group with red fill. So yeah, this worked. We create another group with the fill color for the red buttons. And then we move all these rectangles, all these buttons inside it. And then we do the same trick like we did before, which is just use like the multi-select in order to turn all these rectangles to use our G-transform and use elements. So basically what we are going to do is just remove all this stuff that is not the X, Y's, because we just need the X and the Y's, and then write G-transform equals translate, give it the X, and give it the Y. I love this multi-cursor editing. Close the group, and then inside each group we can add use xlink href equals key. All right. And if everything works well, we should now have the red buttons, but see, like, we reduced the code to about half the original size, and I think now it's much easier to follow. Great. So the next thing we're going to do, we are going to take care of the texts. Now, just with the buttons, Inkscape creates a lot of like stuff that can be basically reduced, just like we did with the buttons. So let's go ahead and do that. So first of all, we don't actually need all this text. We'll just use the first one as a template. And what I'm basically going to do, I'm going to position the text relative to the button. So we can just, instead of having to figure out the coordinates for each of the elements, we'll just figure out the coordinates for one of the keys, and then I'm going to copy paste it to all the others. So let's see, for the first key, I think the first thing we can do is obviously format code to have it easier to see. And then if we save now, we can see that the one was shifted, because now its position is relative to the, it's like translated by the group, so it's relative to the rectangle. And in order to fix that, let's do a few things. First of all, to make our life easier, we are going to remove this scale transform. We can just use the font size to control the size of the text. We can also remove all these uninteresting elements and the line height as well. And to be honest, we can actually get rid of the T-span element. The T-span element allows us to have multiple text with different, like multiple words with different formatting, but we don't need that. We just need one character. So basically we can get rid of that and remove it, replace it with just the character. And so it will refresh and redraw one. And I think the next thing we want to do is to fix those X and Y, so they are at the center of the button. So I think that would be around 3 and 8. I'm just subtracting the translation from the original value. That should probably do the trick. Yep. And let's see. Now, yeah, it's more or less positioned correctly. We'll take care of that in a moment. But another thing we can do, since we are going to use the same font and font size for all the buttons, we can move these guys up to this group. And then we are left with just a short text element, which is much nicer. And then we can make it shorter. And let me see, I think the Y is a bit off. Like if we zoom in, we can see it's not vertically centered. So let's try with 8.1. Yep. Now, basically, this is now the point that I specified here, 3 and 8.1, is the top left of the character, if I'm not mistaken. We can check it if we add another character. We can see that it will probably not be centered. So if we want it to be centered, there is an SVG attribute that tells us like the to center the text instead of like aligning it to the left. And I'm not sure how it's called, so let me check in another element in the Arduino. We also have texts, and let me see, text anchor, that's the name. So we need to say that the text anchor, we can also do it like for the whole group, is in the middle. Let's see if this did the trick. Is the text anchor now in the middle? Yep. So now like the point I gave it is actually the middle of the text. So I need to adjust it to be the middle of the button. And I can basically calculate it because I know that the width of the button is where your button, yeah, the width of the button of this key is 11.2. So the midpoint would be 5.7, I guess, 5.6. So let's change it to 5.6 and zoom out a bit. So basically what I did now, I made sure that even if we have characters of different width, they're still going to be centered. I think the next thing would be to make sure that these buttons are all aligned. And basically right now it's a bit scattered, so I'm going to organize them. Basically sort them by the y coordinates. So all the buttons with 10.9 are like the top row. Just see, yeah, 1, 2, 3, A, 5, 6. So yeah, so I'm going to organize them row by row. So it seems like, yeah, the top ones are the first. So this one is going to be 2. And this one is going to be 3. And then the next step would be to do the same. So this is 24. Yeah, it seems like they are more or less arranged by this. Oh, this one belongs here. If you want to arrange them, actually, let's go ahead with this and then decide about the order. So 1, 2, 3, and then this is the next row. It would be 4, 5, 6. 4, 5, 6. Yep. 1, 2, 3. Think, yeah, these are not actually the right coordinates because they are going this way, like the x is decreasing. So I'll just shift them around to keep this more sane. So this is actually number, I have to shift 4 and 6. So, yep. So 4, 5, 6. And then this would be the next row. And here I can see they are, they have pretty much the same coordinates. And I can do it, just copy paste, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, and actually I see that I made a mistake. This one should be red. We'll fix it in a moment. But first of all, let's take care of this one. This is like the last row, 53, the y coordinate. So this is going to be 0. And then this is like the remaining key, and we should move it to the red button section because it's not supposed to be a blue one. And you can see that how by refactoring this SVG code, I made it really simple to change like the color of the button and the order of the buttons because I removed all the duplicate information and only kept the important essential information for each of these buttons. So yeah, let's add the labels here as well. So text that says A. Yeah, that's the top one. That should be A. And then this one is, oh, that's pretty big. Yeah, I have to copy the font size as well. Actually, I can, since I'm only going to use one font, I can go copy this to the top level SVG element. So it applies to all the text in the SVG. And I think, yeah, let's make this number a bit prettier. I mean, 8.2 will probably render the same size, but it will be easier to shorter. We don't need that level of precision here. And let's see. So we need to keep to give labels to the other keys as well. So this is A, this is B, this is C, right? And then the next one is D. Let's see, and these one are, I think, Hestrik and Hash. Let's say ABCD, and yeah, asterisk and hash pound. So one asterisk and hash sign. Okay. I think judging by the x coordinates, it seems like I inverted the, yeah, they should be inversed. So let's fix that. Okay, and hash. I think I will put D at the end, just to keep the order the same as they appear in the matrix, like A, B, C, D, All right, so I think we are done with the text now. A few other things we can improve here. So first of all, we have these two rects that make the shape of the background of the like enclosure of these elements. So let's put them together. Like this one is this outline that we created. Let's put them together. Right, and then a few more things we can do. We can like make this a bit prettier. Like it doesn't have to be by 5.01. We don't need this kind of precision. And then with the x and y's, this is something that Inkscape really loves to do. This practically means 1.1 to the power of multiplied by 10 to the power of -7, which basically means 0. So you will see this a lot of times, and basically I just changed them to zeros. Now it's even shorter so that this rect fits in one line. Let's write it's the keypad outline, this like two rects. And then for the second rect, we can pretty much do the same. Like we can remove some of these decimal digits, make the radius the same. Stroke width has to be 1, just to make it a bit easier to read. So, yep. So yeah, so there is another small optimization we can do if we really like. So we have this field that repeats on all of the text elements. We can get rid of that by just adding a style element. So let's actually do it. So removing all these fields, let's just copy one so that we have them. So the reason we can do it is because we only have one color of text. So we can use CSS to apply this color to all the text elements. So just add a style tag and say text elements get this style. Let's see if that did the trick. Save and wait for it to reload. Yep. Yeah, it did a trick. So that's another nice trick of how to remove duplicate info. And as you can see, at this stage, we pretty much removed all the duplicated information from the SVG file. Yeah, we can remove these decimals here as well and make these borders of the buttons also consistent. The stroke width also. So basically, that's what it takes to make this SVG more more human readable, more user friendly, and easier to maintain. And with that, we pretty much finished with the SVG part, and all we have to do is to add events, and let's do that. So at this stage, we have the SVG for the element, and it renders quite nicely. And what we want to do is to actually make it interactive. So whenever the user clicks on one of these keys, on one of these buttons, it will this element will emit a click event or button pressed and button released event. If we look back at the push button blog post, we can see that I did pretty much the same steps as we did here. So after I drew it on Inkscape, I exported it to SVG with optimized SVG output, and then I went ahead and spent some time tidying the code, and finally I converted it into a custom web element using lit element. And the last step was to make it interactive. So basically, in this case, I used the gradient to visually distinguish between the normal and the pressed state. And let's actually have a look at the code, how I did it in the push button, because it was a few weeks ago, so I don't really remember. So this is the code for the push button. And as you can see, I did here something a bit different. I wrapped the entire SVG element with another button element. So basically, this whole thing is just a big button element that wraps an SVG element. And this HTML button element actually listens to all the events. Now, with the push button, it was pretty straightforward to do because we only have one thing that can be pressed. But in the membrane keypad, we actually have 16 keys, so that's going to be slightly different. In retrospective, one thing we could have done is, instead of building this thing with SVG, we could have just built it with a couple of HTML divs and give them some styles. And then each of those elements would just be an HTML button element, and we would get all the behaviors of HTML button elements out of the box. But first of all, we already did it with SVG, and it would be a shame to throw all of this away. And second thing, all the other components in this elements library are already implemented as SVG, so we want to have this one as well, just to keep it consistent. So with that, I think the next thing we can do is to make one of those buttons emit event, and then figure out how to apply the same behavior to all of the buttons without just copy pasting the code. So this is the first blue button, and let's look at the push button to see what events I need to listen to. So at the basics, this is mouse up and mouse down and mouse up to get the mouse presses, touch start and touch end to support touchscreen mobile devices, and then key down and key up to support keyboard event, and I use the space key here to decide whether the button should be pressed or no. So like any good developer, just copy this code here, and basically we can also copy the implementation of the up and down methods. All they do, as you can see, is just dispatch a new event, either button press or button release. So let's copy. These are just lit element event listeners. Oh, there it's also used. It's also using some Boolean parameter to keep track of the state of each button. Let's remove it for now. And then the only thing I'm still missing is the space key, which is just this constant. This is the ASCII key code for space. And hopefully at this, after these changes, I will be able to listen to this, to clicks on this key that is labeled 1, this one. And now, in order to test my changes, I'm going to change the Storybook story. So that would be membrane stories. And then I need to add actions to the stories. So actions, I can remove the knobs. The knobs are these like text boxes that allow me to customize. Actually, we'll keep them for now because we are probably going to add a customization option that will allow us to turn off and on the to hide and show the rightmost column. But I'm also going to add actions. So that's, I think, from Storybook actions, add-on actions, right? And I guess we need with actions. So we add the actions decorator to our story. And now we can define event listeners. It's not happy with that. Maybe that way. Yep. Now we are going to add a few event listeners to our custom element. We have the button pressed or press. How did we call it? Button press and button release. So we have the button press event. And then we can use Storybook to report this event. So we say whenever this event happens, just report it to Storybook. We need to import action as well. And the same goes for button release. So now we can just use Storybook to test our component. Let's go to actions, and you can see whenever I press this, I get a button press event, and whenever I release it, I get the button release event. And the event doesn't contain any useful information rather than the fact that I pressed or released. And as you can see, it only works right now when I press this number 1 for, let's clear this. For all the other numbers, it does nothing, but for number 1, it actually generates this event. So now I think this next step would be to make it usable by the keyboard. So as you can see, I'm using the tab key, but I'm nowhere, at no point I'm getting to this key. So I need to make it focusable, to tell the browser that this element is something that the user can focus on with the keyboard. And to make that happen, I'm going to add a tab index element, tab index attribute. And by doing that, I'm going to let the browser know that the user can focus. And now you can see that when I use the tab key, I can focus on it, and I'm going to press the space bar, and you can see that it actually generates the event. As you can see, it generates way too many events when I hold the space bar down. That's because we removed that Boolean value that made sure we only dispatch this event on the first time. But as for now, we already have this behavior for the first key. And I think the thing I want to do next is to change the visual style of this key when it's focused. Right now it's just drawing this not so pretty border. So I'm going to say take this group element. Now there are a few ways I can achieve that. I'm going to do this through CSS styling, and in order to specifically catch this G element, I'm going to use the tab index attribute as a part of the selector. So basically every G element with a tab index, when it's focused, should have this behavior. Let's try to change the background, the fill color, not the background, it's SVG, not HTML, to black, just to see that it works. All right. And now we are waiting for this to refresh. Yep, it works. So now we can highlight the key. And you know what? Yep, let's choose different color. Let's go back to Inkscape to experiment with which color would make sense for a pressed button. So I would say if it's active, I would probably make it a little bit darker and then maybe change the stroke color somehow. Maybe, what did I do? Yeah, maybe also make it a little bit darker. Oh, yeah, that looks more like active to me. We can also change the text color when it's active, maybe make it brighter as well. So yeah, so I like this. Let's use this color scheme to highlight the active button. So basically we can see that the color, the fill color is changed to this color, and the stroke is just white, and then the text color is also just white. And we can do this with CSS. So we say this is the fill color we copied from Inkscape, and then the stroke would be just white. And then if we have the text element that's inside the focused G, we'll also have a white fill. Okay, let's test this. Wait for this to reload. And then once it's done, okay, whoa. So another thing that happens here, as you can probably see, it's drawing this sort of rectangle to, this is called an outline, to let the user know that this is currently the active element. Now, we don't really want this behavior because it just doesn't fit, so we will say outline none. And I think the same is happening with the text, and that's why we are, oh, no, with the text, I just had to specify the stroke color and not the fill color, and that would, yeah, no, it was the fill color, right? This is the fill color. So maybe the outline made it look that bold. Let's try that again. I'm actually not sure why it's becoming so this kind of bold whenever it's active. Maybe it also needs outline on. But I think it didn't happen before we changed the style. No. Let's try to remove this and see if this still happens. Interesting. Yep. So this has nothing to do. Oh, I know what happened. I guess that the fact that we applied, we applied stroke on the group, and it also cascaded to the text. That the part of cascading style sheet. So the text, the number now had an outline which made it look appear bolder. So we can just override it here by saying stroke is none. And now, okay, finally. And now we have a style that applies whenever our button is active. And we can basically apply this style and make all the buttons get this style by simply adding the tab index to them. So let's do that. All these groups are now going to get a tab index, so all the buttons will be accessible by the keyboard. And this will refresh and we'll be able to see what happens. So basically I'm pressing tab and I can navigate through the keys. And you can see that the navigation is same order as I defined them in the HTML, which may or may not make sense. I think in this case, it would probably make sense to move so first of all, I can override the order by changing tab index, or another way would be to just change their order here. I think it would make some sense to move the hash and the pound before this ABCD. So let's move them up. No, I move the hash and the D. That would be the hash and the pound. Let's move them up. Okay, so now it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 0, pound hash A, B, C, D. All right, it makes more sense. And then I think the next thing we want to do, so right now we only listen for the first button. Another thing I want to do is to change the pointer. So the pointer should be what is called hand. I always forget. Let's ask Chrome. Not pointer. I forgot this. Mouse hand CSS cursor, right? Cursor pointer. So the cursor should be pointer, which gives us this nice little hand when I go over these elements with the mouse, or maybe it doesn't. Oh, right. I need to apply it to the group even when it's not focused. So basically, every group that has a tab index should get a pointer, the pointer cursor. And now, hopefully, we are going to have this little hand when we, So now the user sees that these are clickable and you can focus and click on them. All right, well, we had a pretty good progress today. And in the next part, we are going to try to add event listeners to all of the keys in the keypad. Actually, not to all of them. We are going to try doing event delegation. I hope that would work. And then hopefully finish this feature and commit it. So see you next time. And until then, stay healthy. Bye-bye.